The great hall of the citadel of Eldoria was bathed in dim candlelight, its tall arched windows throwing long shadows across the polished stone floors. The air was thick with the scent of incense, a mingling of jasmine and myrrh that made every breath feel sacred and heavy. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting the kingdom's history, heroes and queens long gone, battles won and lost, magic wielded and betrayed. Tonight the hall would witness the annual ceremony of shadows, a ritual that marked the recognition of heirs from the Alpha and Omega clans, binding the power of bloodlines to the throne. Amid the sea of nobles, Elara stood at the edge of the crowd, her small hands clutching the folds of her pale gray gown. She was shy, more accustomed to shadows than to stares. Her eyes, a soft storm gray, rarely met anyone else's. She kept her head low, her heart beating in a rhythm too fast for her liking. Around her lords and ladies murmured, dressed in rich silks and gold embroidery. Their eyes sparkled with curiosity, with pride, with ambition. Elara wished to vanish into the shadows themselves, to become as unseen as the quiet wind brushing through the hall. It was not only the ceremony that made her uneasy, it was the weight of her family's curse. For generations, her line of Omegans had been marked by misfortune. A lingering darkness, subtle but persistent, seemed to follow her every step. Her mother whispered of it when she was a child. "You must always keep your head low, Elara. Draw no attention. The curse is patient, but it never forgets." And so she had learned to shrink, to retreat, to be quiet. But the ceremony demanded attention. It demanded presence. The Alpha King, Kalen, stepped forward onto the dais at the head of the hall. Even from a distance he was imposing. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes that could pierce through the bravest hearts. His presence seemed to command the hall itself. The flickering candle flames bent toward him as if to acknowledge his authority. His cloak, embroidered with threads of silver, trailed behind him, a shadow upon the marble. The whispers died as he raised a hand, and the hall held its breath. Elara felt a chill, not from the candlelit cold, but from the way his eyes scanned the crowd, stopping on her. She froze, her hands tightening on her gown. Surely he could not mean her. Surely he would overlook the quiet Omega who had tried so carefully to remain invisible. Then she heard it. A whisper, so soft it could have been mistaken for the flicker of candlelight, yet it struck her as though it had been thrown directly into her heart. Elara. Her head shot up slightly, disbelief and fear mingling in her chest. The hall continued to breathe around them, the nobles whispering and glancing about, yet in that moment, it felt as if no one existed except her and the Alpha King. His gaze was unwavering, intense yet not cruel. It was filled with something she could not name. A recognition, a pull, an acknowledgement of her very being. Elara's cheeks flushed. She lowered her gaze quickly, uncertain what to do. The whisper had unsettled her more than any word spoken aloud ever could. She felt as if a thread had been tied to her heart, pulled by an invisible hand she could not resist. The ceremony continued, yet she was barely aware of it. Alphas were called to the dais, their titles announced with ceremonial fanfare, and Omegans stepped forward to show their allegiance and submission. Elara remained at the edge, hoping her turn would not come too soon. She had prepared to be invisible, to be quiet, to avoid attention as always. But something had shifted the moment the king whispered her name. Her mind raced. Why her? She had no claim to the throne, no particular skill or beauty that would warrant such notice. Could it be a mistake? A trick of the court? Or had she, for all her attempts at invisibility, somehow drawn the king's attention? The crowd stirred as the ceremony reached the point of acknowledgement. Kalen raised his hand and a hush fell over the hall. The moment of recognition had come for her. Elara of the Grey Line, the king intoned, his voice deep and steady, carrying effortlessly through the hall. Step forward. The words seemed to echo in her ears. Step forward. A simple command, yet for her it felt monumental. Every fiber of her being screamed to retreat, to sink into the shadows, to hide from all eyes. But the pull she had felt when he whispered her name would not release her. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she moved forward, her steps hesitant, each one feeling heavier than the last. All eyes turned to her. Murmurs rippled through the nobles, speculation and curiosity brushing against the walls like a living thing. Elara's pulse thundered in her ears. She felt exposed, fragile, yet strangely acknowledged. When she reached the dais, Kalen's eyes met hers again. The intensity of his gaze made her knees feel weak. The court seemed to blur around them. The candles, the tapestries, the murmuring nobles. All of it faded into a haze. It was as if time itself had slowed to witness this quiet Omega standing before the Alpha King. "Do you accept your place among the Omegans of Eldoria?" Kalen asked, his voice low and measured, carrying an unexpected gentleness. Ilara swallowed hard. Her voice trembled as she answered, I do. Then rise. His eyes lingered on her, and she felt as if the words carried not only acknowledgement but power. She straightened, lifting her head slightly. And for the first time she felt the weight of the curse on her shoulders, but also, strangely, the weight of potential, of destiny. The hall stirred again, this time with awe and subtle fear. The Omegans present glanced at each other, sensing something unusual. Kalen's attention remained fixed on her, unwavering, almost predatory in its focus, though not in a harmful way. It was a gaze that seemed to see into her very soul, to strip away hesitation and fear, leaving only the raw essence of who she was. Ilara felt something she had never felt before, a strange courage. Not the loud, brash courage of the heroes in the tapestries around her, but quiet, trembling courage, the courage to exist, to be seen, to face destiny even when the path was uncertain and dark. Then, without warning, a ripple of magic surged through the hall. The candles flickered violently, shadows twisting along the walls, and a cold wind swept through, though all windows were closed. The murmurs turned to startled gasps. Some nobles whispered prayers. Others paled, sensing the ancient power that had lain dormant for centuries. Ilara's heart pounded. She felt the invisible grip of the cursed titan, cold and insistent. Yet even in that icy grip, she felt a strange warmth, the king's presence steady and unyielding, as though he were a tether to anchor her in the swirling chaos. Kalen's voice cut through the murmurs, calm and commanding. "Do not fear. This is only the beginning." Ilara's breath caught. She did not fully understand what he meant, but the words resonated with something deep within her, something that had been waiting, hidden, silent for generations. As the ceremony concluded, Ilara returned to her place at the edge of the hall, but she no longer felt invisible. Something had shifted. The shadows that had once comforted her now seemed to whisper possibilities. Danger, power, connection, destiny. And among all those possibilities, one truth stood clear. The Alpha King knew her, and she could not hide from him any longer. The hall emptied, the candles dimmed, and whispers of the mysterious surge spread among the courtiers. Yet Ilara could think of nothing but Kalen's eyes and the whisper that had changed everything. Ilara. The name echoed in her mind, soft but unforgettable. And though fear still lingered, so did a spark that would not be extinguished. Outside, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, brushing the citadel's towers with gold. Ilara felt a strange, thrilling unease. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, what shadows would rise, or what her destiny truly held. But she knew one thing. The Alpha King had called her, and the world would never be the same again. And somewhere in the distance, unseen and waiting, the curse stirred, sensing that its quiet Omega had finally been noticed. The morning after the ceremony of shadows, the citadel of Eldoria felt strangely alive. Sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows of the hallways, casting long patterns of light on the polished stone floors. Courtiers whispered among themselves, speculating about the unusual surge of magic that had shaken the hall the night before. Yet amidst all the murmurs and curiosity, Ilara moved quietly, her steps careful, her head still bowed as she made her way through the corridors. She felt exposed, though no one seemed to notice her. The memory of the Alpha King's voice whispering her name haunted her. Ilara. That single word had felt like a key turning in her chest, unlocking a door she did not know existed. She tried to dismiss it, to convince herself it was nothing more than ceremonial attention, but she could not escape the strange pull that had taken hold of her the moment Kalen's eyes had found hers. She turned a corner and nearly collided with a tall figure. Kalen. He was dressed simply today, in muted shades of black and gray, yet he carried the same commanding presence that had made the hall fall silent at the ceremony. His eyes, dark and intense, flickered with recognition when he saw her. "Ilara," he said softly, his voice carrying an unusual gentleness. "May I walk with you?" Ilara froze, unsure how to respond. Walking with the Alpha King was not something she had ever imagined. Yet something in his tone, a quiet invitation rather than a command, urged her forward. She nodded silently, and together they moved through the quiet corridors of the citadel. As they walked, Kaelin spoke in low tones, careful to avoid attracting attention. "You are not like the others," he said. "There's a stillness about you, but also a strength. Hidden, yes, but undeniable." Ilara's cheeks flushed. She kept her gaze on the floor, afraid that if she looked at him, he might see too much of her uncertainty. I am nothing," she whispered. "You are everything," he replied, his words firm yet not unkind. "Do not let your own doubt blind you to your power. There is a reason I called your name." Her heart thudded. The Alpha King had noticed her, had singled her out among all the Omegans and nobles. It should have terrified her, and yet strangely it did not. A small, hesitant part of her longed to believe in his words. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft echo of their footsteps against the stone floors. Kaelin finally stopped in a secluded courtyard, hidden from the gaze of the palace guards. The garden was small but beautiful, with carefully trimmed hedges, dark roses that seemed almost black, and fountains whose waters glimmered in the morning light. Kaelin turned to her, his expression serious. "There is something you must understand, Ilara. Your presence in the ceremony was not a coincidence. The blood of your family carries a legacy, one that has been intertwined with mine for generations." Ilara's eyes widened. She had heard whispers of old alliances, of Omegans whose bloodlines had been bound to the Alpha Kings in ways no common folk could understand, but she had never imagined that her own fate would be connected to Kaelin in such a way. What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It means that you have a role to play," Kaelin said. "A role that requires courage, trust, and strength. The ceremony was only the beginning, and I am here to guide you." Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. The thought of walking beside the Alpha King, of learning from him, was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. She wanted to run, to hide, yet another part of her longed to stay, to see where this path might lead. Kaelin's gaze softened, as if he could see her thoughts. "I will not force you, Ilara, but there is a choice before you, a choice to embrace the power you have inherited, or to let it remain hidden and risk the consequences." She swallowed hard. Her entire life had been about hiding, about keeping her head low and avoiding attention, yet the pull she had felt at the ceremony, the whisper of her name, had awakened something she could not ignore. I want to try," she said finally, her voice firmer than she expected. Kaelin's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good, that is all I ask." Over the following days, Kaelin began to teach her, not just about control or etiquette, but about presence, about understanding the currents of magic that flowed through their world. He would place a hand lightly on her shoulder or guide her stance, showing her how to channel her inner strength. Each touch was brief, yet it sent a strange warmth through her chest, a quiet acknowledgement of her growing courage. Ilara learned quickly. She discovered that her voice could influence the smallest sparks of magic, that her presence could calm even the most restless of spirits in the citadel. With each lesson, she felt herself becoming more than the shy Omega, who had kept her head low for so long. Yet she also felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier with each passing day. The palace staff noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor. She moved with more confidence, her eyes lifted more often, and even the guards, who had once barely acknowledged her, now regarded her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. But whispers still followed her, some admiring, others fearful. Rumors spread that the Alpha King had taken a particular interest in this quiet Omega, and not all in the court viewed such attention kindly. One evening, Kaelin led her to a high balcony overlooking the kingdom. The sun had just set, painting the sky with shades of deep purple and gold. The wind was cool, carrying the faint scent of roses from the gardens below. "Look at this," Kaelin said softly. "This kingdom, this citadel, all of it is tied to power. But power without balance is dangerous. You have a gift, Ilara, and you must learn to wield it wisely." Ilara shivered, not from the cold, but from the intensity of his gaze. I do not know if I'm ready," she admitted. Kaelin reached out, placing a hand lightly over hers. "None of us are ready, But readiness is not the point. Courage is. The courage to face what you are and what you must become. Their hands lingered together, and Ilara felt a rush of emotion she could not name. The Alpha King was her mentor, her guide, and yet there was something more, an unspoken connection, a pull that tugged at her heart. She looked up at him, and for a moment all the doubts and fears she had carried seemed to dissolve into the evening sky. Suddenly a shadow flickered across the balcony. Ilara stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. Kaelin's eyes followed the movement, sharp and alert. "You're not alone in this world," he said quietly. "There are forces that watch, waiting for any sign of weakness. You must remain vigilant." Ilara nodded, understanding more than ever that her life had changed forever. She was no longer simply a shy Omega hiding in the shadows. She had been noticed, chosen, and pulled into a world of power and responsibility she had never imagined. As night fell over Eldoria, the first stars appeared in the sky. The wind whispered through the towers of the citadel, carrying with it a sense of anticipation, of danger, and of possibility. Ilara stood beside the Alpha King, her heart racing, her mind alive with the possibilities of what lay ahead. And then Kaelin leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper, carrying the same intensity as the night of the ceremony. "Remember this. Ilara, whatever happens, you are not alone. And whatever darkness comes, we will face it together." Ilara's breath caught. The words were both comforting and frightening, a promise and a challenge all at once. She looked out over the kingdom, feeling the weight of her destiny settle upon her shoulders. The shadows of the past were long, but for the first time she felt as if she had a chance to step into the light. Yet even as she felt that spark of hope, a chill ran down her spine. Something moved in the darkness beyond the citadel, unseen and patient. The curse of her family was not dormant. It was watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. And in that silent, watching darkness, a voice whispered her name, softer than Kaelin's, colder, full of quiet intent. "Ilara." The Alpha King felt it too, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. "They are coming," he said, his voice low and tense. "And we must be ready." Ilara's hand tightened over his. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. She could no longer hide. She could no longer keep her head low. The world of shadows had called her, and she would answer, side by side with the Alpha King who had first whispered her name. Days passed in the citadel of Eldoria, yet the uneasy feeling that had followed Ilara since the ceremony of shadows did not fade. The hallways, once familiar in their dim grandeur, now seemed alive with whispers and unseen movements. Ilara felt it every time she moved, a subtle pressure at the edge of her mind, like the brush of a shadow against her thoughts. Kaelin had taken to walking beside her whenever possible, guiding her through training and lessons on her family's hidden power. He was patient, firm, and yet there was a quiet intensity in his gaze that made her heart quicken each time he spoke. Ilara had begun to see herself differently, not as a timid, unseen Omega, but as someone capable of influence and strength. Yet the burden of her bloodline's curse weighed heavily on her, an ever-present reminder that her power could be both a gift and a danger. One afternoon, Kaelin led her to a secluded chamber deep within the citadel, one she had never seen before. The room was circular, its walls lined with ancient runes that glowed faintly with a silver light. A small fountain bubbled in the center, its water shimmering like liquid starlight. "This is the Hall of Echoes," Kaelin explained. "Few Omegans are permitted here. It is a place where the power within you can speak, can reveal itself, but it can be dangerous, especially for those with a family curse." Ilara swallowed, her palms damp. She had never been alone with Kaelin in a place like this before. The intimacy of the moment, combined with the weight of the chamber's magic, made her pulse quicken. "You must listen," Kaelin said, his voice low and steady. "Do not fear what rises within you. The curse is strong, but so is your heart. Your strength lies in balance. Control your fear and you control the curse." Ilara nodded, trying to steady her breath. She had practiced basic control, but never in a space like this, surrounded by raw, pulsing magic. Kaelin reached out, placing his hand over hers as he guided her stance as he had so many times before. "Feel the magic flow," he murmured. "Let it speak to you, but do not let it overwhelm you." The moment their hands touched, a surge of energy shot through her. It was not painful, but it was overwhelming. like standing in the center of a storm and feeling every gust of wind, every drop of rain, every flicker of lightning at once. Images flashed before her eyes, shadows moving across a vast battlefield. A wolf with eyes of molten gold, a broken throne. The visions were fragmented, yet they spoke of something deep, ancient, and dangerous. Ilara, Kalen's voice cut through the chaos, grounding her. Focus on me. Anchor yourself. She blinked rapidly and managed to pull her attention to him. Slowly, the storm within her subsided, leaving her breathless but intact. Kalen studied her, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. You are stronger than you know, he said, but the curse is not idle. It is watching. It will test you and it will try to take what is yours. Ilara's stomach tightened. She had always feared her family's curse, had always hidden from it, hoped it would pass her by. Now she understood that hiding would no longer suffice. She would have to face it, confront it, and find her own strength within. Over the next week, Kalen's lessons grew more intense. He guided her through exercises to channel her power, to harness the energy that flowed through her bloodline. She learned to summon small bursts of light to illuminate the dark corners of the citadel, to sense the presence of others through subtle vibrations of magic, and to calm restless spirits that lingered in the castle halls. With each success, Ilara felt herself changing. Her posture grew more confident, her voice more certain, and the faint glimmer of strength in her eyes became impossible to ignore. Yet with every step forward, she also felt the curse tighten its grip, reminding her that her power carried a cost. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky burned with hues of gold and violet, Kalen led her to the palace gardens. The roses were in full bloom, dark petals glowing faintly in the twilight. The fountains whispered softly, and the air smelled of rain and earth. Ilara, Kalen said, stopping in front of her. You must understand what it means to be both Omega and bearer of this legacy. Your power is rare, but it is not without danger. The curse may awaken fully at any moment, and when it does, you must be ready. Ilara shivered. She had begun to understand the depth of her abilities, but she had never faced the full force of the curse. She felt a tremor of fear and excitement swirl within her. Fear for what she might unleash, excitement at the possibility of mastering it. I think I'm ready, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. Kalen's eyes softened. The first step is always the hardest. You must learn to trust yourself as much as you trust me. Only then will you be able to control the darkness. For the next hour, they practiced in silence, focusing their energy together. Kalen guided her through exercises of concentration, teaching her to channel her thoughts into tangible forms of magic. Slowly, cautiously, Ilara began to feel a connection, not just to her own power, but to Kalen, to the space around them, to the magic that threaded through the citadel itself. As they trained, the sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the gardens bathed in silver moonlight. The night air was cool, carrying with it the scent of roses and earth. Ilara felt the stirring of something unfamiliar, a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the magic they were practicing. She glanced at Kalen, whose expression was calm but intense, and realized that their connection went beyond lessons or duty. It was deeper, more personal, though neither had spoken it aloud. Before she could dwell on it, a sudden movement in the shadows caught her eye. A flicker, a ripple of darkness just beyond the garden walls. Ilara's breath caught. Kalen's head snapped in the direction of the movement, his expression hardening. They are here, he said quietly, his voice tense. The curse. It is awakening. Ilara's heart raced. She had feared this moment, had sensed the presence of the dark force that had always lingered at the edge of her life, and now it was moving closer, drawn by the energy she was learning to control. Kalen stepped in front of her, his stance protective. Stay behind me, he instructed, though his eyes never left hers. This is not just about power, it is about control, focus, and courage. Do you understand? Ilara nodded, gripping the folds of her gown, her mind steadying despite the fear that churned in her stomach. She felt the faint pulse of her magic waiting for her command, ready to rise if she could summon the strength to guide it. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a shape that seemed to shift and ripple with darkness. It was not fully formed, more a presence than a person, but its intent was clear. The curse was testing her, probing the limits of her control. Ilara, Kalen said, his voice low but urgent. Remember your lessons. Control your fear, anchor yourself. Your power is strong enough, use it. Taking a deep breath, Elara focused. She felt the energy within her pulse, her bloodline strength responding to her command. Slowly, she extended her hands, summoning a soft, glowing light that radiated outward, illuminating the garden and the approaching shadow. The dark figure hissed, recoiling slightly, yet it did not retreat completely. Kaylin's eyes met hers, a mixture of pride and intensity. You are doing well. Keep your focus. Do not falter. The light grew stronger, feeding on her courage, her determination. The shadow shrieked, its form writhing as it tried to resist the pull of her power. Elara's heart pounded, but she held her ground, refusing to let fear control her. The magic flowed through her, tethered to her will until finally the shadow dissipated, leaving only a faint trace of darkness in the air. Elara fell to her knees, exhausted, but exhilarated. Kaylin knelt beside her, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. You did it, he said quietly. You faced the curse and held your own. Few have that strength. Tears pricked her eyes, not from fear but from relief and the realization of what she had accomplished. She had faced the darkness within her bloodline and emerged stronger. Kaylin's gaze softened as he helped her to her feet. This is only the beginning, he said. The curse will not rest, and neither will its tests, but you are no longer the same Omega who stood at the ceremony. You are stronger, braver, and more capable than you know. Elara nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and unease. She had tasted her own power, and she had felt the pull of destiny. Yet she also understood that the path ahead would be dangerous, that the curse was patient, and that the shadows had only begun to stir. As they walked back to the citadel, the moonlight casting long silver shadows across the gardens, Elara realized one thing clearly: she could no longer hide. She had been noticed, she had been tested, and she had survived. And now, bound to Kaylin and to her own growing strength, she would face whatever the shadows of Eldoria had in store. The days that followed the awakening of the curse were tense and quiet. The citadel of Eldoria had resumed its usual rhythm, yet a shadow hung over the halls, subtle and insistent. Elara could feel it in the stones beneath her feet, in the whisper of wind through the tall windows, in the way even the servants' footsteps seemed hushed. The darkness was waiting, patient and watchful, as if it had been dormant for centuries only to be awakened by her presence. Kaylin remained by her side at all times, guiding her, training her, and watching over her with a vigilance that sometimes made her chest ache. They spent hours in the Hall of Echoes, mastering her growing power, testing the limits of her strength and learning the delicate balance between control and release. The bond between them deepened, subtle but undeniable, a connection forged not just by lessons and necessity, but by trust, understanding, and a quiet longing neither dared speak aloud. Elara had grown stronger. She could summon light to pierce shadows, sense disturbances in the air, and even calm the restless echoes of the castle with her presence. Yet the shadow that had tested her in the gardens was still at large. Its presence lurked beyond the walls, feeding on fear and uncertainty, and it was clever, patient, and relentless. One evening, as a storm gathered over Eldoria, Kaylin led her to the balcony overlooking the kingdom. The sky was a tapestry of dark clouds, streaked with violet lightning that illuminated the towers of the citadel in sudden, brilliant flashes. Rain began to fall, cold and steady, washing over the stone terraces. The storm approaches, Kaylin said, his voice low but firm, and with it comes the shadow. Tonight you must be ready. Elara shivered, not just from the cold, but from the weight of the moment. She had trained, she had prepared, yet the idea of facing the shadow again filled her with both fear and anticipation. She glanced at Kaylin, whose dark eyes held both reassurance and intensity. I will try, she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. Kaylin's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch that grounded her. Trying is the first step. Focus and trust your power. Trust yourself. As the storm raged around them, a sudden darkness coalesced at the edge of the balcony, materializing into a shifting, shadowy figure. It moved with unnatural grace, circling them, its form writhing and flickering like smoke caught in a wind. Elara's pulse quickened. The shadow had grown stronger, more aware, and it was hungry for the power she carried. Kaylin stepped forward, placing himself between her and the dark figure. "Stay close," he commanded. "Use your light when I give the signal. Control your fear and you will prevail." The shadow hissed, a sound like wind through dry leaves, and advanced. Its presence was suffocating, cold and heavy, pressing against Ilara's chest. She could feel her own magic stirring within her, responding to the threat. Tentatively, she raised her hands, summoning a faint glow that shimmered like silver mist. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. Good, now steady it. Do not let the fear control you. Ilara focused, pushing her fear into the core of her power. The glow expanded, wrapping around her like a protective cocoon. The shadow recoiled slightly, then surged forward again. More aggressively this time. The air crackled with energy, and the rain turned into a mist carrying a strange scent of ozone and earth. You are stronger than it expected, Kaelin said, his voice calm despite the danger. Do not falter. Anchor yourself in your courage. Ilara closed her eyes for a brief moment, recalling Kaelin's lessons, the words he had whispered in her ear during training, the steady presence of his hand over hers. She felt the pulse of her own magic, of her bloodline, and she let it flow through her fully, shaping it with her intent. When she opened her eyes, the light from her hands had grown brighter, a pure, steady glow that pushed back the darkness. The shadow shrieked and writhed, its form twisting violently, yet it could not penetrate her defense. Kaelin moved closer, guiding her with words and gestures. Yes, that is it, hold it. You are doing well. Together they pushed against the shadow, their combined presence a force of light and will. The storm seemed to respond, lightning illuminating the balcony as if acknowledging their struggle. Slowly, deliberately, the shadow began to lose form, dissipating into the rain and mist, leaving behind only a faint trace of darkness that lingered in the edges of their vision. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted but exhilarated. The thrill of victory mingled with a deep, trembling sense of accomplishment. She had faced the darkness and held her ground. She had survived, not because Kaelin protected her, but because she had trusted her own strength. Kaelin knelt beside her, his hand brushing the wet strands of hair from her face. You have done more than I imagined, he said softly. The curse tests all who bear it, yet you have faced it and endured. That courage, it is rare. Ilara looked up at him, her chest heaving. I couldn't have done it without you. Kaelin's gaze softened. No, you could have. I merely guided you. The strength was always yours, Ilara. You just had to see it. For a moment they remained there, the storm raging around them, two figures bound by shared struggle and unspoken emotion. The distance between them felt smaller, the connection stronger, though neither spoke of it aloud. There was a tension in the air, a quiet, simmering acknowledgement of feelings neither dared name. But even as they caught their breath, a faint whisper echoed through the balcony. It was subtle, almost lost in the sound of rain, but it carried a weight that made Ilara's stomach tighten. Not yet. The bond will be tested. She turned sharply, but the shadows were empty, the wind carrying only the scent of rain and stone. Kaelin's hand found hers again, grounding her. Do you hear it? She asked, her voice trembling. I do, Kaelin admitted. The curse is patient. It watches, it waits, and it will test us again. Tonight was only the beginning. Ilara nodded, swallowing hard. She had begun to embrace her power, to trust in her growing strength. But she understood now that the path ahead would not be easy. The shadows were cunning, relentless, and ancient. The challenges would be greater than anything she had faced before. That night, as they returned to the warmth of the citadel, the bond between them deepened in ways neither fully understood. Ilara felt a quiet courage, a steady confidence that had not existed before. And Kaelin, who had seen countless warriors and nobles, recognized in her a rare combination of strength and heart, of courage and gentleness. Days turned into nights, and the training continued. The shadows of the curse loomed ever larger, yet Ilara's power grew. She learned not only to summon light, but to sense disturbances in the air, to detect movements and intentions before they fully formed. Kaelin guided her, teaching her to balance control and instinct, patience and action. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, they rested in the Hall of Echoes. The runes along the walls glowed softly, casting silver light across the chamber. Ilara was exhausted, yet there was a sense of satisfaction in her chest she had never known before. Kaelin observed her silently, his eyes reflecting the glow of the runes. You have come far, he said, his voice quiet, almost tender. But there is more to face. The curse will not relent and the shadows grow cleverer. You must be ready. Alara nodded, her hand brushing against his unconsciously. "I will be ready," she said, her voice firm, carrying a new strength. Kalen's lips curved in the faintest smile. "I know you will. That is why I brought you here, why I called your name at the ceremony. You are meant for more than hiding in the shadows. You are meant to face them, and to rise." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear but from the weight of his words and the promise they carried. She had been tested, had survived, and had begun to embrace the power within her, yet she understood that the greatest trials were still to come, and that the bond between her and Kalen would be both her strength and her vulnerability. Outside, the wind howled through the towers of Eldoria, carrying with it a sense of anticipation, of danger, and of destiny. The shadows were patient, but they were awakening, and Alara, once shy and unseen, now stood ready to face them side by side with the Alpha King who had first whispered her name. The citadel of Eldoria was silent, but tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Alara stood at the highest tower, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, the wind tugging at her hair. Below, the kingdom stretched out like a sleeping giant, unaware of the dark force gathering at its edges. The shadows that had tested her before were no longer hiding. They were advancing, drawn by her power, patient but relentless. Kalen approached silently, his presence steady and commanding. Even in the howling wind he seemed unshaken, a calm anchor in the tempest. "It begins tonight," he said, his voice low and certain. "The shadow will come fully, and you must be ready." There is no room for hesitation. Alara swallowed, feeling the mixture of fear and resolve tightening in her chest. She had faced the shadows before, had summoned her light against them, but tonight would be different. The darkness had grown stronger, and so had her own power, but she knew that courage alone might not be enough. "I am ready," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. I will not hide." Kalen's eyes softened as he studied her. "I have never doubted you. Remember what we've learned. Control, focus, and trust in yourself. And remember this, you are never alone." The wind shifted, carrying a cold, oppressive presence. The shadows were here. They poured into the courtyard below like a living tide, swirling and coalescing into forms both monstrous and ethereal. The air grew thick, heavy with darkness, and even the faint glow of the citadel's torches seemed to dim in their presence. Alara took a deep breath, summoning her power. Light flared from her hands, gentle at first, then steady, expanding outward in a protective aura that shimmered against the advancing shadow. The darkness hissed, writhing and twisting as it met her light, probing for weaknesses. Kalen stepped beside her, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Steady yourself. Feel the flow of your magic. Let it guide you, but do not let it control you." Alara closed her eyes for a brief moment, grounding herself. She felt the pulse of her power, the echo of her family's legacy, and the steady presence of Kalen beside her. She focused not on fear, but on courage, not on the shadows, but on the light within her. When she opened her eyes, the glow from her hands had grown brighter, illuminating the tower and casting the shadows into sharp relief. The dark forms shrieked and recoiled, yet they did not retreat. They advanced with renewed ferocity, intent on overwhelming her. Kalen drew his sword, its blade shimmering with a silver light that matched the glow of her magic. "Together," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "We face this as one." Alara nodded, feeling the bond between them strengthen, a tether of trust and shared determination. She stepped forward, her light flaring, meeting the shadows head-on. The battle was fierce. The shadows lashed out, curling tendrils of darkness seeking to snuff out her light. Alara moved with precision, each step guided by instinct and training, each burst of energy pushing back the encroaching darkness. Kalen fought beside her, his sword cutting through the shadows, his presence both protection and strength. For a moment, the chaos threatened to overwhelm her. A tendril of darkness surged toward her, striking with the force of a tempest. Alara faltered, her concentration slipping. But Kalen's hand was there, steadying her, his eyes locking with hers. "Focus, you are stronger than this." With a deep breath, Alara regained control. She let the magic flow through her, not as a weapon, but as an extension of herself. The shadows hissed, twisted, and began to dissipate, unable to withstand the combined force of her courage and her bond with Kalen. As the last of the darkness dissolved into the night, a hush fell over the courtyard. The storm had passed, leaving only the gentle sound of rain dripping from the towers and the faint scent of wet earth. Ilara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kaelin knelt beside her, lifting her chin so that she met his gaze. "You did it?" he said softly, pride and awe mingling in his tone. "You faced the curse and you prevailed." Ilara's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart pounding with relief and exhilaration. "We did it," she corrected, her voice trembling. "I couldn't have done it without you." Kaelin's eyes softened, the intensity of the battle giving way to something warmer, something unspoken yet deeply felt. "No," he said gently. "The strength was always yours. I only guided you. But together we are stronger." For a moment, they remained there, the world around them quiet and still, two figures bound by shared struggle, courage, and an unspoken bond that had grown through every challenge. Ilara felt a surge of emotion she could not name. Relief, pride, and something deeper, something that reached beyond the trials they had faced. The wind carried a whisper, softer than before but clear in its intent. "The bond is true. The light endures." Ilara turned her eyes to Kaelin, seeing in him not just the Alpha King, not just her mentor, but someone who had stood beside her through fear and struggle, someone whose presence had been both anchor and spark. Kaelin's hand brushed hers, a brief grounding touch that sent a warmth through her chest. "Ilara," he said quietly, "the darkness is gone for now, but you have proven yourself, and more than that, you have proven that courage and heart can conquer even the oldest curses." Ilara's lips curved into a small, weary smile. "And what now?" she asked, her voice soft, though her eyes shone with determination. Kaelin's gaze lifted to the horizon, where the first light of dawn began to touch the kingdom. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. We protect what matters, and you embrace the power and the life you have earned." Ilara felt a sense of peace she had never known. The shadows had tested her. The curse had challenged her. And yet she had endured. She had faced fear, embraced courage, and discovered a strength she had never known she possessed. And beside her, Kaelin had stood as guide, protector and partner, their bond forged in trials and triumphs alike. The kingdom seemed to breathe with them, the towers of the citadel glinting in the morning light, the gardens glistening with raindrops, and the air carrying a quiet sense of renewal. Ilara stood, feeling the light within her steady and strong, ready to face whatever the future might hold. Kaelin stepped closer, his hand finding hers again, and for the first time neither of them hesitated. The bond between them, tempered by trials, courage, and trust, had grown into something undeniable. "Ilara," Kaelin whispered, his voice carrying the weight of both command and affection. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Ilara nodded, her heart swelling with certainty. "Together," she echoed. As they stood on the balcony, overlooking a kingdom that slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like centuries, the last traces of darkness vanished from the night. The curse had been faced, the shadows defeated, and a new dawn had begun, not just for the kingdom but for Ilara, for Kaelin, and for the bond that had carried them through trials that tested every ounce of their courage and heart. The wind shifted, gentle now, carrying with it the faint scent of roses from the gardens below. The world seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the strength, the courage, and the light that had endured. Ilara felt a quiet smile form on her lips, a sense of completion mingled with anticipation. The journey had been long, the darkness had been fierce, but she had found herself, her power, and her place in the world. And beside her, Kaelin remained, a constant, unwavering presence, his hand firmly holding hers, his gaze steady and full of unspoken promise. For the first time, Ilara felt whole. She was no longer the shy Omega who had kept her head low at the ceremony. She was a bearer of power, a force of courage, and a heart capable of love and trust. And in that moment she understood something fundamental. Light could endure even the deepest shadows, and together they could face anything. As the sun rose over Eldoria, casting golden light over the towers and gardens, Ilara looked at Kaelin and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." Kaelin smiled, his expression gentle yet fierce. "Always," he said. "Always, Ilara. From the moment I called your name, I knew you were destined for more, and now, together, we step into that destiny." The kingdom awoke beneath them, unaware of the battles fought and won in the quiet of the night. Shadows had been defeated, courage had been proven, and a bond had been forged that neither time nor darkness could break. And as the first rays of light touched the towers of the citadel of Eldoria, Ilara and Kalen stood together side by side, ready to face a future filled with both challenge and hope, a future that belonged to them and to the light they carried within.